I'm probably amongst good company as we're all kind of watching all these jobs that are clearly going to be replaced at some point over the next 20, 30, 40 years, maybe sooner for some of them. I guess I'm probably somewhat unique amongst my peers in that I'm very optimistic. I think this is not, I guess I'd say this is not that different than the second industrial revolution. I think if you look at America's history, we replaced about half of our jobs every 90 years for about 300 years now. And that's been a very good thing. It's ironic because it's just so funny. We're working on all these AI technologies, for example, in healthcare, and everyone's saying, oh, are you going to have enough jobs? And then you go to DC and you look at the numbers, and our country is going to be spending a fourth of all of its money on healthcare, and it's going to go bankrupt if we don't make healthcare more productive. So I mean, overall, the big challenge is how do we make these things more productive, and how do we do more with fewer people? And that's the only way society gets wealthier, and that's always been the case.
But this one feels different in that I think we always have a tendency to think that this wave is going to be uniquely disruptive, and clearly some of the cars and telephones, we're not talking of that level. But what feels unique is it's going to reach far deeper into the workforce. We're not just talking manual labor that people go from building houses with their hands to sort of automating brick making. We're talking about, fairly high level, high cognitive skill tasks are going to be automated to a large extent. That does feel quite different. And I'm sure we're going to replace some new jobs, making robots or computer scientists, but there's going to be clearly fewer of those than what we're losing from retail, from trucking, from lawyers. Sorry, lawyers, but that's easily a skill that we can quite automate a big chunk of.
We can automate some of it. I think a smart lawyer is tough. Listen, there's a lot of possible responses there. First of all, the horses to cars analogy is very interesting to me because a couple of my very good friends are building these electric vertical takeoff and landing machines, which I think actually are a very big jump, similar from the horses to cars to being able to very cheaply fly around much longer distance. So that's a separate topic. But I do think there's a lot of these things happening at once. I think stepping back, the main answer I'd give to this question is are there still going to be problems in the world that need to be solved? And I think that's a really useful way to think about things, both as an entrepreneur and as a policymaker, is when you're building a company, you're saying, this thing is broken compared to how it should work. I can figure out how to make this work much better, or my friends and I, whatever, can figure out how to make this work much better. That's why I'm building this company. And a lot of jobs are going to always exist as long as there are things to fix. And I agree that if AI gets to the point where it's as smart of all of us, then we're going to have an existential crisis, right? Where, if we get to the point where all of us are merging into a universal consciousness, it's probably not worth arguing about jobs. That's just a different world. But if we're not getting to that point and people are still a lot more advanced than AI, which I think will be the case for the next century, there's going to be a lot of things that people need to do to fix things in the world. And I think that human intelligence and the human mind is a lot richer than people give it credit for. And I think the vast majority of people will be able to train and get skills to do things that will help fix problems in the world.
Okay, well, setting aside the sort of Skynet scenario, which I'm quite happy to, it still feels, I always return to, I remember when I went to journalism school, one of the teachers showed us this new cool trick. This website was going to make our job so much easier. We had a separate class in teaching us to use this thing called Google. And obviously now this is completely, this is second nature to most of us, it's a verb. But it feels like the sort of new knowledge that we need to assimilate all the time is getting faster and faster. That what you studied at the first year of university might be obsolete by the third year of university. That it's just happening at a greater pace. Mm-hmm. And don't you worry about that? I think
what that means is you do need different models of education, right? Mm. And not to go too much into that, but I think the incentives for education have to change. You need the top schools basically. Sorry about that. Turn this off. You need the top schools basically incentivized to stay with students over time, teach them new skills, or you need to copy the Germans, and the companies themselves are going to have to start doing that for skilled labor. Like that's a big shift that's not done right at all in our country. But I'm really quite optimistic that there's not going to not be problems to solve in the world. And if you can figure out a problem to solve, it turns out a market economy is going to employ people to solve it. Mm. So, it's too simplistic, but there's a lot of versions of that. We have this piece we wrote in Wired last month where we go over like 12 new futuristic jobs, and there's a lot of them. I actually think a lot of them, not to draw back to the topic at hand, but I think a lot of them have to do with finance as well, actually, in a lot of new ways. I think that ultimately finance is about allocating the world's resources more efficiently and more effectively, and it's about aligning incentives. And a lot of that's going to involve being able to use human insight about their friends and about their community on a small scale in order to align those incentives. And so there's actually value you can add just by being in a community and in order to help allocate resources better. So for example, for credit or risks or other things, you're going to use data that just people have just by having basic human intelligence the computers are not going to be able to get without their help. So there's just all these things that you can do to kind of make the world work better by being a person as part of a community.
So in the world of finance, it would be better in the future if your daughter becomes a private banker than a trader?
Well, I guess what I'd say is I don't want her to become one of the million people who's part of the current middleware. Not that these people don't have great lives, but I think if you look around and where are we spending most of our money in the financial ecosystem in New York, it's all these people are actually part of some kind of very large, very intelligent, very bureaucratic middleware that involves combining some kind of messy thing with people and technology to try to solve problems for these giant platforms. And so finance is a very, very inefficient, very expensive industry. And I would like to replace most of those jobs by replacing the platforms with better technology, which will drive more of the dollars to be spent on analysis, on human intelligence, and not as much on the kind of repetitive work that, frankly, most people still have to do if they're part of finance right now.
But in the finance industry, just to stay on that point, it's been interesting to see how many banks are now trying to desperately rebrand themselves as technology companies. I mean, to what extent do you think that is? I mean, and when I talk to people, they do seem to get this. They agree that there is this middleware issue there.
Yep.
To what extent do you get the impression that they're going to be able to do it? How quickly or how slowly?
Well, I think the more sophisticated. So first of all, if I was a big bank, I'd be doing that too. I'd want to. I think Goldman Sachs has done a great job of attracting a lot of great engineers, and their value is in large part because they are very good technologists. I think a lot of other banks are doing various versions of this, and I'm very impressed by a lot of the technologists that run the tops of places like Morgan Stanley and Bank of New York and a lot of others. I think a lot of them are realizing that they need to say, here's what we're the best in the world at. We have a brand, we have certain areas we want to dominate, we have certain products, certain networks, and then here's the things that we're not as good at that we're going to outsource. And you're seeing a lot of people start to outsource a lot of things, and I think that's where a lot of, frankly, the biggest opportunities are in financial technology right now, is to own these giant platforms that the banks and institutions no longer necessarily are going to run themselves. I mean, all these institutions grew up kind of like as their own cities with these giant pieces of things inside of them, and they're very aware they're going to have to rip some of those out and combine it with other people in the industry in order to make it more efficient. So I think that is a very big trend.
But you think they're capable of that?
Well, it's not so much that they're capable of doing it efficiently or effectively or as quickly as they should, because maybe they should have already done it, but they know they need to, and it's going to happen over the next 3, 5, 10 years, and the ones that are much slower at doing it are not going to be as competitive.